So today I want to go over how you can earn up to 45 million experience an hour in Diablo 4. And the method to earning this much experience is from running Nightmare Dungeons, which were massively buffed in the most recent patch, but there are quite a lot of ways to increase the efficiency of running these dungeons and earning even more experience. And there were 4 major changes to Nightmare Dungeons in the most recent patch. First being that killing any enemies within a Nightmare Dungeon gives a lot more experience than it used to give. Second being that completing a Nightmare Dungeon gives you a lot more experience for the completion. Third being that the hold off event that is found midway in most dungeons will now also be rewarding experience, and some of these holdout events can spawn in like a dozen elites, so for some dungeons you're going to be getting a ridiculous bump in experience from that specific change alone. And the last change being that once you activate a Nightmare Sigil, you can now go to your map and teleport directly to that Nightmare Dungeon, which will also massively increase the efficiency and experience you can earn every hour. And from some community testing, it seems that the increase to the amount of experience from killing enemies and completing the dungeon at the end has been increased by around 80%. But keep in mind, you're not able to teleport to the dungeon, which is just going to massively increase the overall efficiency, and you're now getting experience from that holdout event midway through the dungeon, which is also just going to be giving you more experience on top of all of the other changes. And there's a handful of ways you can optimize the amount of experience you're going to be earning. First off is to always have an elixir active. That's going to give you 5% increased experience. And since you're not having to log out to say reset normal dungeons, even as a solo player, you can have an elixir active 100% of the time. If you have players you want to play with to do these runs, you're going to be earning 10% increased experience because you gain 5% if you're near another player. And if that player's in your group, it's 10%. And then you're going to be gaining increased experience for fighting enemies higher level than you. And how this works is if an enemy is 3 levels above you, you're going to be gaining 25% increased experience, and that's the cap for that experience buff. So you always at minimum want to be facing enemies at least 3 levels above you. But that's just a percentage increase to the total experience you're earning from those enemies, but you can also increase experience by just fighting enemies higher level than you, because all enemies give a base experience depending on their level. So the higher level an enemy is, the more base experience you're earning from them. So if you have a very strong build that you can run Nightmare Dungeons that are much higher level than you, making the enemies much higher level than you, that's overall gonna give you more experience than facing lower level enemies. But with that being said, it may also be slower for you than just lowering the Nightmare Dungeon tier and being able to kill enemies much quicker. This is fully going to depend on how strong your build is, how strong your gear is, and how quickly you can clear out enemies. But at a minimum, no matter what, you should always be facing enemies 3 levels above you. And if you don't have a super strong build, that's generally where I would recommend to be farming. And an easy way to figure out the enemy level based off of the Nightmare Sigil tier is look at the tier of that Nightmare Sigil and add 54 to it. So if it's a level 30 key, add 54 to that, that's going to give you 84. You're going to be facing level 84 enemies. And you can further optimize this by looking at what Nightmare Dungeons you're running and what buffs and debuffs are on the Nightmare Sigils. And this is primarily going to be based upon what build you're currently using. Some dungeons are much better for certain builds, some dungeons are much better for other builds. I know some builds are really good at finding the elites, killing them very quickly, and moving on, leaving a lot of the smaller enemies alive, and then some builds, such as a Pulverized Druid, basically clears out and hits the entire screen anyway, so it's much better at clearing out every single enemy. So this is something you're really just going to have to figure out through trial and error. Is my build better for this dungeon? Is my build very good at blind burrows? Or is my build much better at finding all the elites, completing the dungeon a bit faster, and getting into the next one over clearing out every single enemy? And like mentioned, I've been able to earn up to 45 million experience an hour, but that's at the very high end. That's from running dungeons that my build is very optimal for, having the perfect Nightmare Dungeon levels, and basically having everything fully optimized. But you could probably expect to be earning more around 30 million experience an hour on average. This isn't fully optimized. This is just running kind of the mid-tier dungeons. This is not having the strongest build in the game, but with how much they buffed the Nightmare Dungeons, 30 million experience is something that most builds are going to be able to consistently get. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.